Welcome to Lesson 2 in Excel for Busy Salespeople, Absolute versus Relative References. So in our first lesson, we built some basic formulas using both subtotal and sum. And now we come out here to our next column, which is our commissions. So in this case, our commissions are calculated as F3 times J2, which means it's the total times the commission rate. And so we're ready to copy that formula down, and you'll see immediately that we get a massive failure. And so the question is, what went wrong? So we go here to F3 times J2. We look at the formula. That's okay. But you notice as we copy down, each one, both the row increments for the formula here and for the formula here. Well, of course, there's no formula up there, which is going to make it pretty difficult for us. So the question is, all right, I need to lock this item down right here, and how do I do it? So I guess my favorite metaphor is you're a carpenter. You need to nail this reference down. So how do you do that? How do I make sure that this reference doesn't change as I'm dragging this down? And in Excel, it's called an absolute reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit my formula, F3 times J2. And so think of yourself as a carpenter, and I'm going to put a nail right here in front of J. So that locks column J down. So now it won't go left, it won't go right. So if I click that and I fill it down, that really didn't do what I was hoping for. I still have the error message. Even though the J changed, the column stayed fixed, but the row changed with me. So now I'm going to go up here and put a nail, going to nail this guy down right here in front of row 2, because that's the most important thing. So now when I copy this down, you'll see immediately that everything works correctly, because in every instance my number 2 stayed fixed. Now, since this is a really simple example, I certainly could have omitted the $ in front of the J, because I'm not copying this formula left or right. So you kind of need to understand your application. If you're going to copy this left and right, there's other numbers here for other columns. In this case, we have an OE, just one rate. But in the sales world, oftentimes we have an OEM rate and a POS rate. And so we'll use the OEM formula for one number and the POS formula for a different number. But for the purposes of keeping it simple, it's probably best just to lock it down in terms of both numbers. So for here, we'll do $J times $2, and then copy that formula down. Now, because this is a tutorial, you saw me typing these in by hand. However, you can also use F4. So as I press the F4 key, you will see that it cycles from here's the basic with its relative value. Here I've locked it down in both column and row. Here it's just row, here it's just column, and then it cycles back to 0. So the F4 key will do that for you all the way through. That works really great, but there's another way of accomplishing this, and that is to define this as a named reference. So I'm going to go here to the tab labeled Named Reference. And in this case, the first thing I would want to do is define this name. So how do I go about defining a name? So I'm going to go to Formulas, I've got my row selected. I'm going to click Define Name. In this case, I've already named it, but in a regular case, I would call this, we're going to call it rate. Now, Excel does not want you, if you're naming something, it does not want you to start the name with a number. It does not want the name to have spaces. You can have certain special characters like dashes, different capitalizations. Those don't affect it, but it will not allow you to start it with a number, and it won't allow a bunch of special characters. So here I'm going to just set this as the default. The scope is the workbook. I could give a comment here, and then by default, it's already a fixed. So it's going to call out the tab, which is called Named References. It's going to call that tab out, and then it's going to refer to J2. And so that completely locks it into the tab and the file, and the row and the column. So I click OK. Now I look at my formula, and I will say equals this number times, and then I just named that rate, and as I start typing it in, you'll see it gives me an option. So here I've already defined rate. Now I can name the same thing multiple names, which may be a little bit confusing, but for right now we're going to use the rate that I just defined, and so it's F3 times the rate. Press enter. And then as I copy this down, you'll see that that formula works because rate is always defined as this spreadsheet, this row, this column. It's all fixed. So that was a pretty short lesson 2. Next we'll be on lesson 3, which is sort of common copy and paste errors.